Wow. Not sure what else to say after the first two episodes of Amazon Prime's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. And not like, wow, that was freaking awesome, beyond belief. No, this was more of a, wow. I really can't believe I just sat through 2 hours of that kind of wow. Alright, confessions out of the way first. When I first heard that Amazon was going to do a Lord of the Rings series, I was beyond excited. I have read the books. In fact, I own 2 different versions of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, saw all of Peter Jackson's movies multiple times in the theater, the Hobbit trilogy once each, though, and for obvious reasons. Saw the 1977 animated The Hobbit a few times, and paid obsessive attention to the news that came out about the Amazon series. And that right there was probably the downfall of this series, the media campaign. Every time the 2 sophomores running the show, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, opened their mouths, every time the actors cast to play significant roles opened their mouths, the writers gave interviews, the directors tweeted, the producers talked about the show on red carpets, and every single promotional video to hit YouTube was a complete and utter disaster. This may have been the worst rollout of a Hollywood project in history. Every move, every writing decision, every casting choice, every word out of Amazon seemed designed to alienate the very people they should have been trying to get on their side to signal boost their campaign to the moon, the fans of Tolkien. Instead, they made sure the most literate, committed, connected, and passionate fan base in the history of fan bases was so thoroughly pissed off that there was little chance that they would come anywhere near what they hoped the show would achieve. Not only that, they made sure that those fans with platforms would watch and then pick it apart mercilessly in the loudest possible way. None of that is designed to make sure a show succeeds. It is one of the major problems I have mentioned before that Hollywood is currently struggling under. In the age of social media, the studios have lost control of the message when trying to pimp a project, and their only recourse when the idiot adult pretenders that they hire step in it is to either disavow what they say ad infinitum and hope it goes away, or back said pretenders and attack the fans. We all know what the studios have decided on, and every single studio has come to the same decision. The defense is always the same, and the fan base is dismissed as istophobes of one type or another. Sometimes all of the types when a project is a particular disaster, in the hopes that the normies are not paying attention. And up until now, it has mainly succeeded. After all, The Last Jedi made $1.5 billion. The Rise of Palpatine made $1 billion. Even Captain Marvel managed over $1 billion. And even failures like Ghostbusters 2016 made almost $230 million. But those times seem to be coming to a close as the studios have been caught one too many times trying to pass their Lightyears and Eternals and Thor 4s off as Toy Story and Avengers Infinity War and, well, let's be honest, Marvel had pretty well botched and butchered Thor as a character outside of the first 3 Avengers movies. So, do I count myself as one of those watching the Rings of Power to tear it apart? Absolutely. But it was only fair to explain where I'm coming from when watching this mess. Amazon did everything in their power to make it so I was pissed going into this show. Their butchering of the Wheel of Time did not help their cause, by the way. Robert Jordan is spinning in his grave. Unlike House of the Dragon, I can't keep the spoilers down, so consider this your warning that there will be spoilers. Not that much happened in episodes 1 or 2. Also, unlike my House of the Dragon episode 1 review, I'm going to start with the things they did well first. Why? Because it is a damn short list. What everyone saw from the god-awful teasers and trailers was the beautiful cinematography. The scenery was gorgeous and well shot when the CGI involved was not a mess. The camera work was just superb in framing the landscapes and moving about the land with the transitions. The transitions in particular were clever in the use of the maps to show where the landscape was in relation to various locations. And the downside of such beautiful cinematography is it makes everything else look like crap because it lacks the grand majesty that Peter Jackson managed by shooting in real landscapes and sets. And well, that's about it. There were a couple of other things that were not exactly good, just less annoying / irritating than I thought they would be going into the show, judging by the media campaign. To be honest, the longer Morfydd Clark was off screen, the better the show got, which is not saying much, I know, but it made such a difference that I realized in the second episode that I was not taking notes every scene or two, or sometimes every half a scene. I was astounded when I realized how irritating her character is by its mere absence. I actually almost started to care where the storylines were going. And then she was back and all was back to normal. The other thing that was less annoying than I was led to expect was Princess Disa. Never mind the whole senseless black dwarves and beardless dwarven women thing. Sophia Nomvet made herself the most annoying part of an entire production's cast and crew worth of annoyance during the media campaign. The woman would just not shut up about being the first female dwarf, which she wasn't, and practically made every interview about the show actually about how important she is. It got to the point that the poor castmates she was sent out with were rolling their eyes on camera at her bloviating. I'm not sure how she stuffed that ego down enough to actually make Disa not as annoying. I had other complaints about her, but that wasn't one of them. That's it. That's the list of the things they either got right or didn't manage to mess up as badly as I was anticipating. I know, not a long list, and not very significant in its contents. On to the list of complete buggery, and because there was a lot of it, big and small, and I took notes in order that the fecal matter hit my television screen, we will go in order in which the problems were arranged by Amazon's gestures. The opening prologue material was fairly bad for multiple reasons, but the dialogue was execrable over and over again throughout the whole 2 episodes actually. Redundancy and melodrama abound. It was like the writers and the showrunners sat down before starting production of their show to watch Peter Jackson's movies in order to get an idea of how people should talk. And then they went about writing dialogue like high schoolers doing a really bad rendition of Shakespeare. There were scenes where I was actually embarrassed for the actors playing Galadriel and Elrond for having to say what they were saying in front of a camera, knowing millions of people would actually be hearing that drivel come out of their mouths. Don't get me wrong, Morfydd Clark and Robert Aramayo did their best, but the writing combined with various other problems I would talk about further down the list just make this show completely unwatchable. Not just unwatchable, but completely baffling how anyone saw the early dailies come out and still kept pumping money into the show with the same inept buffoons left in charge of putting it together. Next up was the brief battle scene. Anyone who has seen Peter Jackson's battle scene at the beginning of The Fellowship of the Ring, the battle scenes in the Two Towers, the various battle scenes in The Return of the King, know how a Lord of the Rings battle scene should look. Not only was this one complete crap visually, but it is thrown up on the screen for a couple of minutes at most, and the main focus of it is shown to be acting so unlike someone in the middle of a melee fight that it made me want to scream in frustration. How do you screw up a battle scene? Well, Payne and McKay managed. And then they cut to my next point of ire. Galadriel moping about the battlefield after the fight, supposedly piling helmets into a pile about 3 times as high as she is tall. How? More importantly, why? Never mind, because the court jesters at Amazon probably have a stupid explanation that involves the awesomeness that is Galadriel. Which leads me to the next point, showing that Amazon really should have picked someone other than apprentices of Jar Jar Abrams, the destroyer of franchises, to run their launch of an attempted franchise. Finrod, played by Will Fletcher, is killed in the battle. They don't show it, of course. It goes from him trying to push, not stab or slash or bash, his way through a wall of orcs, screaming at someone, to him dead on a bier. Unmarked, mind you, despite him losing his helmet somewhere during the battle, with a dagger laid on his breast between folded hands. This is not how Finrod dies anywhere in Tolkien. He does die, but by killing a werewolf with his bare hands to save a friend, succumbing to his wounds afterwards. Later he is reborn in Valinor. Will Fletcher did a fine, if brief, job playing Finrod, but his death is merely used as a driving force to create warrior Galadriel, an obsessed, and no, that's not too harsh a word for her, woman searching the world for years looking for an enemy to slake her thirst for revenge. One of these days, Hollywood is going to rediscover the ability to craft strong female characters, but this is not that day, nor any day in the near future, it would seem. To emphasize her awesomeness, I'm tired of trying to come up with new and inventive ways to call McCain and Payne clowns, so I'm just going to go with that. The clowns running the show had Galadriel pull out a map to consult it, and then pull out her dagger to help her read it for reasons. This is shown in the prologue as she leads a troop of about 10 soldiers through a snowstorm. I know this whole sequence is supposed to show her as a badass visionary leader, while the men around her are short-sighted, weak, and incompetent. What it really does is show her to be a toxic commander, the type of commander that winds up getting scragged by her own troops. Not only is she a bad commander, she's also a bad subordinate. She is leading the coterie through the storm without heed to the cohesiveness or morale of the company, never mind their health, and regardless of the orders she was given by the king. When they find the fortress that she is looking for, and had been for centuries, it winds up being inhabited by a snow troll. The fight which ensues was pure ridiculousness. Her girl bossery was even worse, and the physics-defying stunts used in the scene were embarrassing. And we are just getting started on the ire-raising creature into which they have transformed one of the best and most powerful elves in the Tolkien lore. It was about this time that they ended the prologue, having caught up to the quote-unquote present, and it was at this point we are introduced to the Harfoots. In including the Harfoots in the show, the Clowns of Amazon show two very important things. First, they could not care less about Tolkien's writing, since hobbits don't appear until the Third Age, when they cross the Misty Mountains and create the Shire. When asked, the clowns tried to sell some bull story about Tolkien not saying anything about the Harfoots not doing amazing things. Two things wrong with that. First, if it was amazing, don't you think Tolkien would have written it, or at least scribbled a note about it? But no hobbits until the Third Age, though they are known to people earlier than that. They just don't do anything worth noting. And that slip is the second idiocy. Harfoots are hobbits, no matter what the lawyers at Amazon say they can get away with. Harfoots, Fallowhides, and Stores are three types of hobbits. It would be like saying, well, we're going to do a story about Mohawks, but we aren't going to call them Iroquois, and we're going to insist they're different. Why are they playing the word games? I personally think it has to do with their intellectual property rights contract. If I'm not mistaken, and this is just speculation and hearsay, they're not allowed to do anything that changes the lore, although they have moved well beyond that at this point. As such, they can insert hobbits into the Second Age, but they can stretch the fact that the Harfoots were the first hobbits across the Misty Mountains to include them in the Second Age. Why? That brings us back to the second very important thing, which is also the second thing wrong with Harfoots in the Rings of Power that I was talking about. Namely, they think their audience is stupid. They know that Peter Jackson made billions for Warner's at the box office and even more in merchandise. They don't think you, the audience, will buy into a Lord of the Rings story unless there are all the hallmarks that everyone saw in Jackson's films, namely hobbits, wizards, elves, dwarves, orcs, and Sauron. They can put elves and dwarves and orcs and Sauron in with no legal problem. Hobbits and wizards are a different thing altogether. If this is actually the reason for the word games, it is merely another sign of a deficit of creativity. They, being Amazon, have the television rights to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings trilogy, and its appendices. All of that time in history in which stories actually happen that are exciting and impactful, but they chose to do a Second Age story instead, a time which Tolkien said not much happened, aside from the War of the Elves and the creation of the Rings of Power, and in which Amazon wanted to capitalize on fan-favorite characters that would not exist or be prominent for thousands of years. Why? It keeps coming back to why in this series. But let's move on for now. I could probably do an entire month's worth of videos breaking down the stupid choices made for this series. Elrond was introduced shortly thereafter, and they have completely cucked him. Elrond is a wise and powerful elven lord. It is Elrond that becomes defender of Eregion in the War of the Elves, and fought in the siege of Barad-dûr, that saw Sauron's body destroyed by Isildur before Isildur took the One Ring for himself at the end of the Second Age. Robert Aramayo doesn't really look like an elf. Many of the elves do not for reasons, and he certainly does not act or look like Elrond. They have basically turned him into a poet and a politician and a diplomat in this series, and it is tragic. I think it's about this time the falling star is shown. All the characters we have seen thus far, except for Galadriel, see it and look worried. I will leave that event to comment on for episode 2. And then Galadriel jumps off a damn ship in the middle of the frickin' ocean. I hope you appreciate how much finger control it took to clean that up to the point that I did. It was not easy. She and her men are rewarded by the king for their efforts against orcs with a journey to the Undying Lands. They get to the entrance of Valinor. Her men are prepared to enter as the boat gets closer and closer to the light. And what does Galadriel do? Clasps her brother's dagger, turns away from Valinor, and jumps off the effing ship in the middle of the effing ocean. And what is her plan? To swim the hundreds of miles back to shore. Because she is such awesomeness that no sea creature in the Sundering Sea would touch her? Or the less likely, given how they have written her, she drowns after exhausting herself? Grace Randolph, film critic and entertainment reporter, put out a video in which she called Galadriel both a Karen and a Mary Sue. Based on the first episode, I could not agree more. She is easily the most damaging part of what the clowns that run the show have put together. And to tell you the truth, I can't really tell whether it is because the writing is so god-awful or if it is Morfydd Clark herself. The show is ever so much better, but still really not good, when she is off screen. She makes Rey Palpatine look like a well-written and fleshed-out character by comparison, despite all the backstory they give us for Galadriel. Although she is supposed to be thousands of years old, she acts like a spoiled 21-year-old who pouts and threatens to throw tantrums if she does not get her way, to the point of demanding to see the king, whose orders she was flagrantly disobeying, so that she can demand things of him as well. Episode 2 was so much better, but still sucked, because Galadriel was not in it nearly as much, as I mentioned. I only took 4 notes for the second episode, whereas I took 2/3 of a page for the first. The falling star from the first episode is found by who else? The rogue faux hobbit, Nori. Why rogue? Because every time she was mentioned in the first episode, that is how everyone described her, so the stupid audience understood she was different and special. Her chubby but not very bright friend Poppy follows her to see a naked man in the middle of a rather small crater that is splattered by flames that are strangely not heating the rock around her. 2 problems with this part. There are no wizards in the Second Age, which is probably who this is supposed to be, and yet again the faux hobbits are acting very un-hobbit-like. We get to know them a little better in this episode, but it does not help. They are shown as dirty, secretive, and far more literate in an age that they were illiterate in Tolkien's writings. Their dialogue is just as bad as the rest, but it is seemingly meant to be folksy and charming, whereas anything but. The next ire-raising event is Arondir, the elf, going to a village that is seemingly poisoning the land and creatures around it. He is a soldier, and it is getting dark when they get there, so they are carrying lamps. What is Arondir, a soldier, doing with his? Putting it right in front of his eyes. This is idiotic. I know it is a small thing, but the problem with this show is a lot of little things were let go and they turn into big issues as concerns characters, plot, setting, and the overall world the story is built into. Putting a light source in front of your eyes damages your ability to see in the dark. No soldier would allow light to be shined in his eyes if he could help it. Never mind hold a flaming lamp in front of his face as he's trying to clear a burned-out village where everyone is missing. And then he sends a woman the writers are trying to convince us he has romantic feelings for off into the night to warn her village while he decides to jump in the tunnel that has been dug under the raised village. And he puts the lamp in front of his face the entire time. So, of course he winds up being grabbed by something with claws that we don't get to see anything else of before the scene ends. Given that he was shown in chains fighting what looked like a warg in the trailers, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess he is caught by the orcs. Yet another small but important thing happens when we get to Moria. Celebrimbor and Elrond walk, for reasons beyond my understanding, to see the dwarves to get help building Celebrimbor's Tower Forge. I will overlook the stupidity of Elrond turning to Celebrimbor and telling him to go home. He will be back in a couple of days when the dwarves refuse to grant them entrance. Really? They walked the hundreds of miles between Eregion and Moria, and Celebrimbor is just going to leave while Elrond goes with the dwarves. Utter retardedness. Elrond gains entrance by claiming the right of Segin Tarag, a dwarven rite that is apparently so complicated that Durin, Elrond's supposed friend, has to explain it multiple times to all the dwarves crowded in the chamber like it was Fight Club night. What is Segin Tarag? Elrond and Durin break rocks on anvils until one fails to break their rock in one stroke or quits. Elrond breaks his hammer, gets a new one, and promptly gives up. Durin escorts him out, pissed at him because Elrond has not seen him in 20 years. Elrond talks him into letting him apologize to his wife and kids for missing out on everything, and Disa, Durin's wife, invites him to dinner over Durin's objections. As I said, Disa was far less annoying than Sofia Nomvet herself was during the promo campaign. What got to me in this sequence was that the accents, especially Disa's, seem to change without rhyme or reason, sometimes in the same sentence. The accents in general in this show are bad where not natural to the actors, but the mix of Irish, Scottish, and what I think was a little bit of Cornish was just sloppy acting that nobody managed to catch. Even more annoying is at no point in this episode does Elrond explain why he came to Moria except very vaguely. Nothing about this story is making me care about any of these characters. I keep coming back to the question of why, and no answers are forthcoming. 2 hours of The Lord of the Rings of Power, and I don't care about a single character in it. I don't care where the story is going, and nothing about the show is either blowing me away or making me think this is even remotely Tolkienian. The writing is absolutely dreadful, some of the acting is just as terrible, the CGI, especially scenery that is not part of the landscape transitions, is as horrendous as anything going on with Marvel these days, and nothing about the story justifies the money spent, the hatred aimed at the fan base, or the bastardization of J.R.R. Tolkien's works that were supposed inspiration for this show. If you have not seen the show, and you are at all on the fence about it, do yourself a favor and skip it. I will continue to torture myself, but House of the Dragon would be more worth your time, as flawed as that show is. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you like what I do here, like, subscribe, comment, and share this video to help me out with the algorithm. My links for social media and Patreon are in the description. I'll be back soon with another video.